How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Nina just sent me a beautiful little quote story about the Satmar Rebbe. So the Satmar Rebbe, not known for being such an easygoing guy, right? Very stark, very demanding of his Hasidim. But listen to this story. Before the Satmar Rebbe began his shiur, his class, which was mainly attended by Holocaust survivors, right? So the Satmar Rebbe really formed his community after the Holocaust, and now it's centered in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, though there are definitely Satmar communities in many places. But before he would begin his shiur, which was mainly attended by Holocaust survivors, he would always ask each person in attendance how they were doing. One day, an eager chassid, an eager disciple, who was impatient to start learning, said, "Rebbe, we've been talking for a while. Can we begin the shiur?" And the Rebbe responded, "The Gemara starts on daf base," right? We've been learning together for a long time. We know that every tractate in the Talmud begins on daf base, page 2. Every tractate of the Talmud starts on page 2. It doesn't start on page 1. And so the Satmar Rebbe extracts his beautiful teaching from that. The Rebbe responded, "The Gemara starts on daf base. But what is daf aleph? What is page 1? It's asking your friend how he's doing." How are you doing? How are you doing, my holy sisters and brothers? I'm so glad to be learning with you on a Friday. How are you doing? Let me know. Put it in the comments. Who's in the house? Bella in Florida, Yehudit in South Carolina, Guy in Ohio, Gordo in Scotland. Great to see you here. Tom in PA, Bill in mid-Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Shandora. Yeah, Gordo in Scotland. I think last week you were, or the week before, you weren't here. And everybody's like, "Where's Gordo? Where's Gordo? Is Gordo okay? Where's Gordo?" I love that we've really become a community through the comments in these classes. Tom in PA, Bill in Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Shandora in the Bronx, Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Sharon in New Jersey. I'm sorry, who's got a birthday? Shandora, happy birthday, happy birthday. Lorraine in Texas. Sharon, where can I get a cap like yours? You can get this cap. They are now available. shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Nina, please put that in the comments. And for you, because you are my good friends, I have a promo code, 20% discount. Use promo code SHIELD. Promo code SHIELD, SHIELD, for 20% off. That's the Guns N' Moses hats and all the AT merch. Lots of wonderful merch. We haven't been pitching that in a long time, but we really have really cool t-shirts like "I Don't Roll on Shabbos," "Let's Light Up the Darkness," "Light It Up," "Greet Everyone with a Smile." There's lots of really good stuff there. The Hamsa pillows, we have those on our couches. It's like we're firing on many cylinders, and I often neglect just to mention things. If I was more of a salesman, I would. But yes, AT store, shop.accidentaltalmudist.org, promo code SHIELD. We just created that promo code today, have not advertised it at all. So you guys are the first to know. Barry in North Carolina. Yehudit says, I am very well. I am healthy and I am here. Thank God, Yehudit. Marty in Arizona. Gordo, I love that sense of belonging to. Thank you. Bill, I'm doing pretty well, actually. On the one hand, our campus ministry annual retreat had to be canceled because it was lacking enough attendees, which was disappointing. But the research paper I'm working on as part of my GRA position is, in fact, 2 papers, which is going great. I love it. Very good. Nina put the store and the discount. And Sharon, I'm learning Talmud with my cat Sai. What could be bad? Amen. And over there on the YouTube side, Ella's in the house. Marjorie in Georgia. Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. All right, let's get busy. We're nearing the end of a chapter, even though I guess it's a short chapter, but where the Mishnayos, Mishnayos, start going quick, right? So we're going to encounter 3 Mishnas today. Our daf today is page 67 here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud, working our way through chapter 4. Today we're opening at near the bottom of page 66b with the end of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 4, and then we'll get into 4, 5, and 6, I think. Yeah, 4, 5, and we'll complete, God willing, 4, 5, and 6. Okay. Mishnah number 3 at the bottom, page 66b. Rav Yosef raises a dilemma. So with regard to rainwater that was falling, and the owner consciously desired that it should fall so that it would wash his immovable lower millstones, what is the law with regard to the seeds in the millstones? Advanced Gemara question here. Continuing our discussion of what's attached to the ground. Is it part of the ground or is it not? We're getting at this because of our discussion of what's included when somebody sells a house or a field. But then we have these kind of related corollary type of questions where we have ritual laws that are dependent on whether something is attached to the ground or not. Here now we're talking about that grain, for example, only becomes, first of all, when grain is on the stalk, when it's still attached to the ground, not susceptible to tumah. It cannot become ritually impure. Once it's harvested, no longer attached to the ground, then, for example, if a creeping thing, a sheretz, falls into the pile of grain, does that render it tameh? Would that render it impure? If a sheretz came into contact with you or it entered a clay vessel, it would render you impure. It would render the clay vessel impure. But if it falls onto a pile of grain, it does not necessarily render that pile of grain impure, because in order for food to become susceptible to tumah, it first has to come into contact with water or one of the other 6 liquids that can render food susceptible to tumah. If it's always been dry and never came into contact with this liquid, then it is not susceptible to tumah. And not only that, it has to, when it comes into contact with that moisture, it either has to come into contact with the moisture because the owner of the grain did that, he did it on purpose, that he wet it, or that he's pleased that it was wet. It's okay with him that it was become wet. Otherwise, it's considered sort of unprocessed and it is not yet susceptible to tumah. So here, the owner of the lower millstone, which is considered attached to the ground, I mean, it's part of the ground, the upper millstone is movable. He wanted water to rinse off his lower millstone. There are seeds that were being ground between the millstones. That's what's being cleaned off with the water. So now it's coming into contact with the water. He wasn't trying to wet the seeds. He was trying to rinse off the millstone. But it would seem inevitable that when he rinses off his millstone, that water would touch the seeds. So the water coming into contact with the seeds was desired by the guy, but his purpose was to clean the millstone. So the question is, does this render those seeds like grain susceptible to tumah, right? And why are we talking about this at all? Because that lower millstone is attached to the ground. Okay, so the Gemara now, Rav Steinsaltz explains for our benefit that the verse, but if any water be put upon the seed, it shall be unclean to you, meaning susceptible to becoming unclean with ritual impurity. That's from Leviticus 11:38. And this teaches that seeds and other food become susceptible to ritual impurity only after they have been detached from the ground and water or another of the 7 liquids specified in the Mishna has been put on them. So the food must be exposed to the liquid willfully by the owner. That is, he must he must desire or at least be pleased that the food should become wet. Rav Yosef asks about a case where the owner wants the rain to fall on the millstones. Does the water make the seeds upon which it falls susceptible to impurity? So the Gemara clarifies Rav Yosef's question. Do not raise this dilemma according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says anything attached to the ground has the same legal status as the ground. Since the lower millstones are attached to the ground, they therefore have the same legal status as the ground, and water that falls on the ground, even if it is pleasing to the owner, does not make food susceptible to ritual impurity. When then should you raise this dilemma? Raise it according to the opinion of the rabbis, who say it does not have the same legal status as the ground. So what is the law with respect to imparting that susceptibility to ritual impurity to the seeds that are on it? And the Gemara concludes, taiku. This dilemma remains unresolved. Much longer explanation of the question than the answer. New subject. Rav Nehemiah, the son of Rav Yosef, sent a message to Rabbah, the son of Rav Huna. Rav Nehemiah, the son of Rav Yosef, sent a message to, this is the guy's whole name, Rabbah, the son of Rav Huna the short, at Nehardea. So presumably Rabbah, the son of the short Rav Huna, as opposed to a different Rav Huna. So the question, the message said, when this woman bearing this letter comes before you, now we're on 67a, collect for her 1/10 of her father's estate, in keeping with the rabbinic ordinance that states that if a man dies, his sons are obligated to give his daughter 1/10 of his landed properties as a dowry, and collect it even from his immovable lower millstones, as they too are considered landed property. So further evidence that an object like a lower millstone, which is attached to the ground, becomes part of the ground, as it were, and is no longer considered movable property. Rav Ashi said, when we were students in Rav Kahana's house, we would collect for this purpose even from the rent of houses. Since this money is earned from real estate, it too has the status of landed property and is included in the dowry calculations. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 4. Now, Mishnah number 4. One who sells a courtyard without specifying what is included in the sale has sold with it the houses, pits, ditches, and caves that are found in the courtyard, but he has not sold the movable property. And when the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you it and everything that is in it, well, then all these components are sold along with the courtyard, even the movable property, both in this case where he executes the sale without specification, and in that case where he adds the phrase that includes the movable property. He has not sold the bathhouse, nor has he sold the olive press that is in the courtyard, as each is an entity with a discrete purpose and not integral to the courtyard. Rabbi Eliezer says, one who sells a courtyard without specifying what is included in the sale has sold only the airspace, by which he means the open space of the courtyard, but nothing found in the courtyard, not even the houses that open into the courtyard. Right? Rabbi Eliezer, much more sparing in what is included than the rabbis, but we follow the majority in this disagreement with Rabbi Eliezer, that one who, as we've been saying over and over again in this chapter, if you're going to buy property, if you're going to sell property, describe carefully exactly what's included in the sale and what is not included in the sale. But when people neglect to do that, and they just made, probably an oral agreement or even just a very vague written agreement, and they said, I'm selling you this courtyard. So we're talking about, okay, well, what's included in that? And the basic concept is we're going to include in that objects, residences, stuff that is integral to the courtyard and not anything else. So therefore, any kind of property that's piled up in the courtyard, well, that's not integral to the courtyard. That's movable property that is not included. But houses, pits, ditches, caves, those would go along with the courtyard. That's Mishnah number 4. Now the Gemara. The sage is taught in a baraisa, one who sells a courtyard has sold with it the outer houses that can be accessed directly from the courtyard, and the inner houses that can be entered only via the outer houses, and the area of the sand fields. As for the stores, those that open into the courtyard are sold along with it. Those that do not open into it, but rather open into the public domain, even if they're located in the courtyard, are not sold along with it. And those that open both into this courtyard and into that other public domain are grouped together with those that open into the courtyard alone, and both these and those are sold with it. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says one who sells a courtyard without specifying what is included in the sale has sold only the space of the courtyard and nothing else. The master said in the baraisa, stores that open both into this courtyard and into that public domain are sold along with the courtyard. And the Gemara objects. But didn't Rabbi Chia teach a baraisa that states that such stores are not sold with the courtyard? And the Gemara answers that this is not difficult. La kasha. This baraisa that teaches that the stores are sold along with the courtyard is referring to a case where the majority of their use is from within, i.e. they are stores that are mainly accessed from within the courtyard, meaning they basically service the people who live in the courtyard, while that baraisa of Rabbi Chia that teaches that the stores are not sold along with the courtyard is referring to a case where the majority of their use is from the outside, meaning from the public domain. So even though they might have a back door into the courtyard, their business is primarily from the street beyond, and so those stores are considered to be on the street and are not included in the sale of the courtyard. Now the Mishnah teaches, and it was similarly taught in the baraisa, that Rabbi Eliezer says one who sells a courtyard has sold only the space of the courtyard, and he has sold nothing found in the courtyard, not even the houses. So to clarify the disagreement between the unattributed opinion in our Mishnah and the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbah said, if the seller said to the buyer that he is selling him darta, i.e. the place of residence, so everyone agrees that he means to sell the houses and that they are also included in the sale. When they disagreed is with when he said to him that the seller is selling darta, i.e. the courtyard. He just said the courtyard. So one sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds that he means to sell only the garden, i.e. the space between the houses. And the other sage, meaning the unattributed author of our Mishnah, holds that he means to sell also the houses. Now, some state a different version of this discussion, according to which Rabbah says, if the seller says to the buyer that he is selling him darta, everyone agrees that he means to sell also the houses that they are included in the sale. And when they disagreed is when he said to him that he is selling him the chatzar, which is the Hebrew term for courtyard, as opposed to Aramaic when we're talking about darta or dirata. So one sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds that when he says chatzar, so he means to sell him only the space, the open space of the courtyard. And the other sage, the unattributed first opinion in our Mishnah, holds that houses are also included in the sale, just as the courtyard of the tabernacle included the tabernacle itself, right? The Mishkan in the wilderness included the courtyard as part of, the Mishkan, the tabernacle structure. So a courtyard includes the sanctuary, the surrounding walls, etc. And you wouldn't say that it's just the space of the courtyard itself. New subject. And Rabbah says that Rav Nachman says, if one sold another a sand field. What is a sand field? That is a place where, let me make an adjustment here, where you gather sand for the purpose of making glass, right? Glass is made out of sand. So a sand field is a place that has perhaps a particularly fine sand or a type of sand that is good for glass making. That's called a sand field. So if someone says to another, I'm selling you a sand field and a pond. The point being that the sand field is used for glass making, the pond is used for fishing. They're not related. They might be owned by the same person, but they serve different purposes. So if the seller says to the buyer, if one sold to another a sand field and a pond, so if the buyer took possession of the sand field in order to finalize the transaction, he has not acquired the pond, and he must therefore perform a separate act of acquisition, a separate kinyan, for the pond. Conversely, if he took possession of the pond, he has not acquired the sand field. And the Gemara asks, is that so? But doesn't Shmuel say, if one sold another 10 fields in 10 different regions, all in one single bill of sale, so once the buyer takes possession of one of those fields, he has acquired them all. And the two cases seem to be analogous. So our antenna goes up. Are the cases analogous? On the one hand, you have fields that could be in different states, different countries even. But they're all fields, right? They all have the same characteristic of being a field where you grow produce. Here, we have a sand field and a pond. We haven't been told whether they're on the same property or not. They're just owned by the same person. But they clearly serve different purposes. Now, if they're both included in a single bill of sale, so why not say that once you take possession of one of them, say the sand field, you acquire both of them since you purchased both of them in the same bill of sale? So that's the question. Now the Gemara rejects the parallel. There, in the case of the 10 fields, the land is all located in one geographic block. And it all has one use, i.e. to be farmed. The buyer therefore acquires all the fields when he takes possession of one of them, even if they are not adjacent. But here, in the case of the sand field and the pond, this has a distinct use and that has a distinct use. One for glass blowing and the other for fishing. Therefore, taking possession of one of them does not effect a transfer of the other. And some state a different version of the previous discussion. Now on page 67b, Rabbah actually said that Rav Nachman said if one sold another a sand field and a pond, and the buyer took possession of the sand field, he has also acquired the pond. And the Gemara says, well, this is obvious, as Shmuel says. If one sold 10 fields to another in 10 different regions, once he takes possession of one of them, he has acquired all of them. And the Gemara explains why Rav Nachman's statement was nevertheless necessary. It is necessary lest you say that there, in the case of the 10 fields, the land is all located in one block with a single use, and therefore all the fields are acquired together, even if they're not adjacent. But here, in the case of the sand field and the pond, this has a distinct use and that has a distinct use, and therefore taking possession of one of them should not affect acquisition of the other. Therefore, Rav Nachman teaches us that if the buyer took possession of the sand field, he has in fact acquired the pond as well, but we needed to be taught that because they have different uses. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4. Now, Mishnah number 5. One who sells an olive press without specifying what is included in the sale has sold with it the yam and the memel and the betulot, which are the immovable elements of the olive press, but he has not sold with it the avirim and the galgal and the korah, which are the movable utensils of the olive press. And we'll get a little bit more into what those terms mean in the Gemara. But it was helpful to me as I was preparing this class when thinking about the components of an olive press to maybe modernize the example a little bit. So imagine that I am selling to you a plumber's truck, right? A plumber's truck. You see plumbers' trucks all the time. They've got all kinds of gear in the back. They've got pipes, they've got pipe cutters, they've got pipe unstoppers, They've got snakes and coils. And maybe they even have a very expensive, high-end, camera at the end of a snake, with a monitor and all kinds of stuff. So if I say to you, you want to buy my plumber's truck? And you say, yeah, Sal, I'll buy that plumber's truck. And we shake hands on it. I say, okay, I'll sell you the plumber's truck for $10,000. You say, I'm in. So what did I sell you? Did I sell you the truck which is suitable for the use of a plumber because it has all kinds of compartments to store stuff, heavy-duty engine, heavy-duty tires, etc., and that's it? Or did I also sell you all the stuff that's on my plumber's truck, all that gear? Now, the gear might be worth much more than the truck. Plumbers have all kinds of specialized tools, all kinds of parts that they would need when they go on jobs, maybe specialized faucets and valves, etc. Was that included in the sale? Is that essentially part of a plumber's truck? Or is a plumber's truck really just something suitable for carrying all that stuff, but doesn't come with it? And even if you say, well, I'm selling you my plumber's truck that has all that stuff on it, what if I have this special high-end AI-powered camera on a snake, etc., that is a very expensive thing and that no one would think would be included, right? That it's a guy, plumber, unless he's retiring, he's not going to sell that and just include it in a sale. Maybe that camera is worth $50,000, right? Now, I certainly in my mind didn't think I was selling you that camera, but maybe in your mind you thought that you were getting it. So what's included when I sell you a plumber's truck without specification? And that's the kind of thing they're discussing right now. What is sold with an olive press when an olive press is sold without specification? So the Mishnah starts by saying that all this stuff, the stuff that's essential to the olive press is included. The stuff that's movable is not. So let's continue. When the seller says to the buyer, in other words, but if the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you it and everything that is in it, then all these components are sold along with the olive press, even the movable utensils. And Rabbi Eliezer says, one who sells an olive press has sold the korah as well, as it is the most fundamental element of the olive press. Now, the Gemara. So the Gemara explains the terms used in our Mishnah. The yam, this is also called the lentil, meaning the round stationary container into which the olives are placed before being crushed. As for the memel, Rabbi Abba Bar Memel said, this is the crusher, the utensil used to pound and crush the olives. As for the betulot, Rabbi Yochanan said, these are the cedar posts, known as klonsot, that support the beam of the olive press. And the avirim are the pressers, wooden boards that are placed on top of the crushed olives and upon which the beam is lowered in order to press the olives. The galgal is the chumrata, a round stone that is placed on the beam to weigh it down. And the korah is the heavy wooden beam used to press down upon the olives and thereby extract the oil, the actual press of the olive press. So the sages taught in a baraisa, one who sells an olive press without specifying what is included in the sale has sold with it the boards that are fixed in place to hold the olives and the vats for collecting the oil and the crushers used to pound and crush the olives before pressing them and the lower millstone, i.e. the stationary millstone base, but not the upper millstone, but not the upper millstone. But when the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you it and everything that is in it, then all these components are sold. And both in this case where he executes the sale without specification and in that case where he adds the phrase that he is selling everything that is in the olive press, nevertheless, he has not sold the wooden boards that are placed on top of the crushed olives when they are being pressed, nor has he sold the sacks, nor has he sold the leather bags for carrying the olives, as these are all movable goods that are not specifically part of the olive press. They might be part of the olive business, but they are not part of the olive press. Rabbi Eliezer says, one who sells an olive press has sold the heavy wooden beam used to press down upon the olives, as it is called an olive press, a Beit Habad, only due to this beam, the most essential part of the press, and this beam is otherwise known as a bad. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Now, Mishnah number 6. One who sells a bathhouse without specifying what is included in the sale has not sold with it the boards that are placed on the floor, nor has he sold the basins or the curtains. And when the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you it and everything that is in it, then all these components are sold along with the bathhouse. Both in this case where he executes the sale without specification, and in that case where he adds the phrase that he is selling everything that is in the bathhouse, he has not sold the tanks of water, nor has he sold the storerooms for wood, as an explicit sales agreement is required for these matters. Now, I think it's interesting that in the case of selling a bathhouse, the tanks of water are not necessarily included in it. Doesn't that sound like an integral part of a bathhouse? Answer, no. Now, the Gemara. The sages taught in a baraisa, one who sells, and by the way, why do we keep reading a Mishnah? And then when we get to the Gemara, we hear about a baraisa. And for people who might be a little bit new, it's good to just mention every now and then, what is a baraisa? Right, so the Mishnah was the first written collection of the oral law. The oral law was meant to stay oral. The core of it, the first few laws were given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. For example, when it says that about tefillin in the Torah, in the written Torah, that you shall bind these words as a sign upon your hand, and it shall be a symbol before your eyes. That's all the Torah says. How would we know that that means that you inscribe those words on a scroll, put it inside a black box, which is attached to leather straps, and you wrap that strap around your arm and put that strap over your head in a box in front of your forehead? How would we know that that's what it means? That's one of the early laws given in the oral law. Why did God give some of the commandments orally to Moses? Because God was establishing that the Torah was coming in two parts, the written part and the oral part. Why was it coming in two parts? Because God understood very well, since God knows everything, sees everything, is outside of time, and can look forward and backward in time with equal ease, that the world, the human world, would keep changing. And if the Torah was to make sense to people who lived 3,000 years ago, and yet be able to cover questions that would come up 3,000 years later, it was going to have to be flexible, malleable. Not that the laws would change, but it would have to have the ability to answer questions that were unimaginable to our ancestors, but that would, come up over the centuries since. And so rabbinic decrees, rabbinic discussion, rabbinic interpretation came into the process and was always designed to be part of the process. Now, the oral law would have remained oral, but for the Roman oppression of the Jews, and they were, trying to, wipe out our religion because they thought that was the source of our strength, and they're right. And so they were wiping out the sages. And then at a certain point, so many sages had been killed that it was like, well, the oral law is going to disappear. And then Rebbe, I'm spacing right now, it'll come to me in a second. But the great sage Rebbe, somebody put in the comments, Rebbe's name, just said we have to write it down. And it was written down in a very terse and almost coded manner that you'd have to have some knowledge in order to understand what the Mishnah said, but it was written down. Now, as soon as it was written down, okay, it's very terse, it's subject to interpretation, and so it needed to be explained and expanded. So the Mishnah was set down, sort of collected around the year 200 of the Common Era, and then the Gemara was the first layer of a commentary on that. It took 300 years, and that was set down by Ravina and Rav Ashi around the year 500. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right, was Rebbe, and so that was the Gemara. Now, what's a baraisa? So baraisas were teachings contemporaneous and almost as authoritative as mishnayos, as mishnas, teachings in the Mishnah, but that didn't get into the official compilation of the Mishnah. But they were very useful to the sages of the Gemara in helping them to understand a Mishnah. They could compare it to a baraisa. And so very often a Mishnah and a baraisa are almost the same, but not quite the same. And that helps them to understand what's included and what's not included, what's addressed and what's not addressed, what was the intent and what was not the intent of a particular Mishnah. So hopefully that is useful. Okay, so comparing Mishnah number 6 to a very similar baraisa. The sages taught in a baraisa that one who sells a bathhouse without specifying what is included in the sale has sold with it the storeroom for the boards and the storeroom for the implements called yakamin, and the storeroom for the basins and the storeroom for the curtains, but he has not sold the boards themselves, nor the yakamin themselves, nor the basins themselves, nor the curtains themselves. Might take 10 seconds to reflect. How fortunate are we that when we want to take a bath or we want to take a shower, we walk into our bathroom? That was a luxury undreamed of for all the people here. When they wanted to take a hot bath, they would go to the bathhouse, right? It's a much bigger deal, much more of a, thing to do to take a bath than just walking down the hall to your own bathroom. Wow, they would imagine that all of us are just beyond rich, beyond wealthy. Okay, so those that are included and those are not. Now, when the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you it and everything that is in it, all these components are sold along with the bathhouse, both in this case where he executes the sale without specification, and in that case where he adds the phrase that he is selling everything that is in the bathhouse. He has not sold him the pools that supply him with water. Well, that makes sense. Whether in the summer season or in the rainy season, nor has he sold him the storeroom for the wood. But if the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you the bathhouse and all of its accompaniments, then all those components are sold as well. We're at the top of page 68a. And the Gemara relates, there was a certain person who said to another, I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. There was a certain person who said to another, I'm selling you this olive press and all of its accompaniments. And there were certain stores outside the olive press where, in addition to the ordinary services that these stores provided, sesame seeds would also be spread out to dry before they would be pressed for their oil. And the seller and the buyer disagreed about whether these stores were included in the sale. And the buyer came before Rav Yosef, presenting him with his claim to ownership of the stores. And Rav Yosef said to him, we learned in the previously cited baraisa that if the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you the bathhouse and all of its accompaniments, all these components are sold. Rav Yosef held that in this case too, the disputed stores were sold. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, but didn't Rabbi Chia teach in a baraisa they are not all sold? Rather, the issue should be resolved as Rav Ashi said. We consider the seller's statement, and if he said to the buyer, I am selling you the olive press and all of its accompaniments, and these are its boundaries, and he included the area of the stores within those boundaries, then the buyer has acquired these stores. But if the seller did not say this, he has not acquired them, as they are not actually part of the olive press and should not even be considered part of its accompaniments. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 4 of Tractate Bava Basra. We are on page 68a, and with God's help, tomorrow evening after Shabbos ends here in LA, we will continue with Mishnah number 7. I'm going to take some questions and comments now. But, we're in that time of year where Shabbos ends earlier and earlier. So hopefully I can get on the air by maybe 9:05 p.m., something like that, 9:05, 9:10, maybe even a little earlier if I can. Okay, looks like I already read that comment that Nina's passing along. I know she's tied up with something. Right, and Tom is giving me that answer, Yehuda Hanasi, thank you. And Tom says, God must have known that at some point the sages were going to have to start writing it down. Yes, sir. And by writing it down, that also eventually would create the possibility of the oral law going way beyond the kind of inner circle of the sages who had it all memorized, and it became available to you and me. Thank God. And Tom says there are still lots of places all over the world where people have to live without indoor plumbing. Just so. And Tom also says, I presume there would be price differences depending on what was or was not included. I would also presume some of the commentaries based on the misunderstandings between sellers and buyers over what the sale included and how much the buyer was paying for what he thought he was getting. Exactly. I think that this whole section is not theoretical at all, right? I mean, I think these questions came up often, and even at the level of the Mishna, because people just very commonly would make agreements without really thinking it through. And I think what's really beautiful about this is these are very, I mean, you know, we wouldn't think of these as spiritually esoteric or even uplifting questions, right? What's included when you sell an olive press? What's included when you sell a bathhouse? But as we've seen over and over, the Gemara, the oral law, the oral tradition, the written and the oral tradition together, the Torah, addresses every facet of the human enterprise, right? And so there is a righteous and holy way to address every question, even what is seemingly commercial and mundane. If we look into it and just really ask ourselves, well, what does God expect of us in this situation? And not just, what does God expect of me according to my common sense? Because my common sense, your common sense, his common sense, her common sense might all be different. And so we have a tradition to look to because our sages have delved so into it, right? I mean, think about it. The Mishnah is not such a large work that we would have expected it to take 300 years and hundreds of sages to compile the commentary on the Mishnah that became the Gemara. But that shows a degree of commitment and, you know, an investigation and just digging into what does the tradition say, what does the Torah say, what does God expect of us, what have our ancestors educated us to do and to be and to think and to want. I mean, there's just so much to learn. It never ends, and may it never end. That's what I've got for us today, and have a beautiful, uplifting, refreshing, rejuvenating Shabbos, and look forward to learning with you, God willing, tomorrow night.